It's a real pleasure to be here. My first time in Israel. Good to see some old colleagues, and I want to thank Ishay, who's not here right now, for the invitation to speak. Thank you for the introduction, Jay. Just one minor correction. I'm a colonel in the U.S. military. Big difference between lieutenant colonel and colonel, so yeah, I'm a colonel. But yeah, so I'm at the University of Pittsburgh. I've been there for 2 years. Prior to that, I worked largely with the U.S. Military, with their research and development commands. But you know, a few very special things about Pittsburgh. Very unique culture of innovation. Our hockey team, which just won the Stanley Cup, back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. So when you drive into Pittsburgh, they have a sign with the City of Champions. And when you go back with their sports history, the Steelers, the Pirates, and the Penguins have all won national championships. So it's a very sort of intense sports culture there. But in addition to that, we have a lot of academic excellence. Our medical school is very well known. The Pittsburgh University Medical Center is top 5 in the country with NIH funding. For example, the school that we are in is rated #1 in the U.S. for schools conferring health-related degrees. And so the research laboratory that I'm in, we've been working very closely with the Department of Defense over the last 10 to 12 years with a tactical athlete sort of program. Prior to that, you know, we got roots in the late 80s working with you know, the sports medicine model, and another very prominent orthopedic surgeon in Pittsburgh, Dr. Freddie Fu, was perfected the double bundle reconstruction technique for ACL injuries. And people come from all around the world to study under him, really just to understand you know, mechanisms of injuries. So, you know, why is the military interested in physical performance optimization, injury prevention? Well, this is a quote from Sun Tzu: "The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war." So I think probably most of us attending the meeting here have a very good appreciation and respect and understanding of the utility of applying sports science and leveraging sports science to improve our, you know, soldier performance, warfighter performance. And I truly think that, that some of the things we're talking about are very important even for national security. So, what's the state of fitness of our soldiers? Okay, I'd like to show this study, which was published back in 2010. This is very interesting. This was a report that was authored by, I think, over 200 retired generals and admirals. That really was a call for action in the United States. It was called "Too Fat to Fight." Just you know, the fitness trends in the U.S. are for lower fitness, obesity trends are up, and this was a call to action from retired military leaders, seeing that we need to do better jobs of educating our youth while they're sort of in secondary school. Now, they followed this report up several years later, and the report is still too fat to fight. So again, I'll show you some data here that even though, like in the U.S. military, we do have mandatory training, we do have mandatory standards, you'd be very surprised when I show you some data of our soldiers that they still don't meet a lot of the sort of national guidelines for activity, sleep, and nutrition. So the point is there's yet a lot of work that can be done to improve the health and performance of soldiers, and I think by leveraging sports science, by really you know, leveraging, again, professionals in that community environment are going to be important. Right now in the U.S. military over the last several years, again, a lot of senior leaders, a lot of our 4-star and 3-star generals are giving greater awareness and prioritizing greater sort of performance aspects. Our retired Surgeon General Patricia Horoho, which was the first female Surgeon General in U.S. history and the first nurse Surgeon General, her top priority was something called the Performance Triad. Has anybody heard of the Performance Triad at all? That was essentially a public health campaign where she tried to make sure that soldiers had greater awareness of you know, what proper activity, nutrition, and sleep looked like. Now, the second person shown on the graph here is General David Perkins. He's a 4-star general, the general, commanding general, Armored Training and Doctrine Command. His #1 priority right now is something called the human dimension concept, or the whole notion that we need to center on our soldier and invest in our soldier more so than equipment, more so than weapon systems, things like that. 3 lines of effort there along cognitive, physical, and social lines of effort. But again, a big thing there is trying to develop soldiers and leaders that are very agile and very adaptable. Lastly, our recently retired Surgeon General, Chief of Staff of the Army General Rodierno had a special studies group where he titled "Human Performance Optimization" and how is the Army going to fight in the future, and how do we need to prepare soldiers to fight in the future. One of the things we hypothesize is that we're probably going to have conflict with near-peer competitors. We're probably going to fight megacities. A megacity is defined as a city, I think, of a population of 20 million or more. There's probably 10 or 12 megacities in the U.S. right now, and that number's going to double in the next 10 years. So again, this report also said the Army will probably deploy smaller formations that have to be tailorable, scalable, and more expeditionary. So to me, when you talk about soldiers being more expeditionary, that's obviously very agile and very fit for us. Okay, one book, I don't know how many people like to read sort of books here, but I would highly recommend is this book here, Scales on War. This is written by retired Major General Robert Scales, who retired as the commandant of the War College. But he talks a lot about, from the U.S. perspective, how we need to consider how we're training for war. And he has a chapter on there on the human dimension aspect of performance. But he has another vignette in the story, in this book, where he talks about General Mattis, who's our National Security Advisor right now. I'm sorry, the Secretary of Defense. And when he was the Commandant of the Marine Corps, he went and he visited Pete Carroll. And he wanted to know, what does Pete Carroll do to train his football team? What's special about what he does in that environment? And how might he be able to bring some things back to the military? So again, this is a question I know that strength coaches, borrowing from professional sports and collegiate sports, how do we incorporate that and operationalize that within a military environment? But you can see here, General Mattis wanted to know, how can we turn our ground service small units into armed Division I athletes? And that's a lot about some of the previous talks this morning about really making that investment in terms of both personnel and equipment and resources. So again, when we do some environmental scanning and look at some things that are occurring, this is again, heavily biased from a U.S. lens or U.S. perspective. As you know, over the last 5 years, we've had a military drawdown, okay? So we have fewer soldiers to accomplish a mission. We've also experienced a very significant budget cut or budget constraints. So with this, drawdown in military personnel, one of the epidemics we still have in the U.S. military, I think it's probably pretty similar to the Israeli military, is just an epidemic of musculoskeletal injuries. And we know most of these are lower extremity. We know that large of these are training related. We had a good video this morning about the importance of low carriage, and I'll show you a graph where what we expect soldiers to carry externally is just a linear increase, and this continues to increase. And with that load, okay, and we know that soldiers maybe aren't as fit as they once were, that is just really a recipe for musculoskeletal injury, which is what we're really seeing. And again, the U.S. military gives a lot of disability benefits related to musculoskeletal injury. So how can we get to the left of this? How can we better leverage, science applications to reduce the number of injuries in a military operation? It's not only going to give us greater readiness as a force currently, but also with VA as well, letting soldiers retire that are free from musculoskeletal disease. I mentioned low carriage. We'll also talk a little bit about the expanded role of women in the military. The U.S. lagged behind Israel in terms of integrating women in the combat-centric occupations. But what does that look like? And I see Norm here. Norm and I spoke to this in Boston here several years ago, because we know women are smaller in stature, have oftentimes less fitness, but they're still required to do the same absolute job, same absolute load in the military. So what does that happen to the musculoskeletal system, and how might more injuries occur as a result of that? And there is really, in my view, from the U.S. again, the changing landscape in terms of fitness policies. I think you see more and more emphasis is being given in terms of trying to do things correctly, things that are evidence-based. Okay, this is a Health of the Force report. This is available on Google. This is published by the Army Public Health Command. A very fascinating report that was published a year ago. And something interesting that they have in this report, they have an installation health index. All the military posts of the U.S. Army, you can go in there and you can see how they rate in terms of activity, sleep, and nutrition. The U.S. military has something called the GAT, the Global Assessment Tool, where soldiers go in and subjectively rate a bunch of different things, and they can get some feedback on that. But I believe it was Patty Doister from Uniformed Services University that took this data and came up with some sort of algorithms to calculate soldier readiness index, and that's what they use for this installation. But when you look at this graph, you look at the very top, and that shows how many soldiers meet the national recommendations for sleep, only 15%. Okay, going down, how many of our soldiers in the U.S. Army meet the daily physical recommendations for activity? Only 38%. And then even down below, how many of our soldiers in the U.S. military meet the daily recommendations for proper nutrition? Only 13%. Conversely, look at all the red. Those are the people that do not meet the guidelines. So clearly, a lot of work has yet to be done, and General Horhill recognized this and tried to really have a public health campaign to give soldiers a greater awareness in this regard. This is another chart where military leaders, again, have tried to do many good things in terms of optimizing human performance programs. And this is just one example here, and we had a very good talk about the Thor 3 program as well this morning. Again, there's a need for more evidence-based outcomes that show that these programs are worth making an investment in. And there's a RAIN report back in 2013, and I know, for example, Ray and Paul are involved with some ongoing efforts now trying to get those good outcome measures that show that these programs are effective, number one, and number two, they are worthy of larger investments as well. So again, here's another little sort of chart here of some current gaps in human performance injury prevention. We already talked about that musculoskeletal injuries remains unacceptably high. There is a lack of organic experts in the military, organic system right now that know about physical fitness. The main proponent for our physical readiness, the Army, U.S. Army training, fitness school at Fort Jackson is not resourced adequately. And number 4 here I've highlighted is that there's really poor synchronization and integration communication among all of the important stakeholders that need to make this work. So again, another picture here, human dimension strategy. Now the picture I show in the lower right-hand corner is a Remington. Anybody familiar with Frederick Remington, a very famous American painter and sculptor? And the reason I show this picture is entitled Stampede. And David Petraeus had this picture when he was in Baghdad during the surge. And for him, it was a metaphor of what he was experiencing during the war. But I think when we talk about human performance optimization, I sometimes think it's a stampede because everybody has their pet project, or everybody knows how people should eat, train, and sleep. So it's very interesting to sort of cipher through a lot of this, noise to get what is really evidence-based. And again, I think as we push forward, we will truly be able to use evidence-based to drive, programs in the military. So this is back in 2016, okay, where the Pentagon realized that we had all these efforts in the U.S. military, but there wasn't any really effort to integrate and synchronize them. So they had a special workshop. They tried to actually rank order these programs in terms of utility. You can see here what the key task was at this workshop, which was back in February 2016. You can see here, very interesting, the definition of physical readiness, the ability to meet the physical demands of any combat, duty position, accomplish the mission, and continue to win. The physical dominance was defined as overmatch, strength, agility, speed, and endurance. So what they did is they had some ORSAs, some organizational research systems analysts. They came up with an algorithm on how you would evaluate a program. These are the evaluation criteria they came up with. So how do you know a strength and conditioning program works? How do you know a nutritional intervention works? How do you know a human performance optimization program works? You have to have a program evaluation. What are those evaluation criteria? This is what they came up with, number 1. Number 2, they weighted these criteria as well. And this is what it came up with the weighting criteria. So just take a second to look at that. I mean, obviously you want a program that's going to be effective, and effectiveness was weighted 25% of how you evaluate a program. Relevance was 27%. So when you look at those numbers, again, it should be clear that in order to determine the efficacy or effectiveness of a program, that you have to have some way to evaluate the effectiveness of the program. Okay? These are the programs that were evaluated, and I won't share the results of how they were ordered, except to say that the Thor 3 program ranked very, very high, maybe even near the top. Okay? And again, the Thor 3 program, when you look at that, all the elements of what you would design are there. Okay. So again, turning to this issue of musculoskeletal injuries in the military. This is data several years old, but over 2.2 million encounters involving over 600,000 service members. Now, we talked a lot about mental disorders and post-traumatic stress, and those impact about 2 million encounters there with about 200,000 individuals. So in terms of magnitude or scope, musculoskeletal injuries affect more numbers and more people than do mental disorders and post-traumatic stress disorder. Lower, you can see the injury incidence rates, and a lot of this data was from the Israeli Defense Forces, which has published some great data over the years, and some of this data is also from the U.S. military. But when they talk about conventional forces, special forces, infantry, non-combat arms, officer enlisted, you see a high incidence rate of musculoskeletal injuries. And across the board, you see these injury rates are typically twofold that for women when compared to men. And again, just another study that's showing that running mileage, long distance running, we've known for some time, is really attributed to a lot of these lower musculoskeletal injuries. We know that if you clamp or limit the amount of long distance running that soldiers do, we know we're going to get similar performance times and see fewer injuries. And again, the picture here is Dr. Kenneth Cooper, who was a retired Air Force colonel who coined the aerobics phrase in the 60s and 70s, and I think things are starting to change, but for too long, people have equated soldier readiness purely with aerobic fitness, and that resulted in just too much running and getting away from that, and I think we're seeing some good data and some good trends, okay? And again, just another graph here. So what are some of those? Okay, another very important point, that when you look at the major cause for medical evacuation from a combat theater, the cause is not due to combat-related injuries, but the musculoskeletal injuries that are related to non-combat related injuries, almost twice the difference. You can see here, musculoskeletal injuries, non-combat related, okay, 24%, combat-related injuries, 14%. There's another paper that paralleled these results that was published by Keith Gray as well. So one of the running jokes in the U.S. military, if you wanted to defeat the U.S. military, you would airdrop in basketballs and soccers and basketball nets, because that's how soldiers oftentimes get injured. We talked about low care and blood sanitary as well. So hey, we published a review paper back several years ago, and this was a physical employment standard conference that Nindl Taylor hosted in Australia. But we did, at the time, we did a review of all the articles that have been published on what happens physiologically and physical fitness-wise when soldiers get deployed. And there's been a lot of anecdotal work over the years, but very few published studies. But we looked at all the published studies. And you can see here a summary across 4 studies at the time were published. And we looked at aerobic capacity, strength, power, endurance, body composition, and we simply looked whether, performance in these variables changed, decreased, or increased. And some pretty interesting results. In 3 of these 4 studies, aerobic capacity decreased, 1 showed no change. For strength, power, and endurance, only 2 tests showed a decrease. 14 tests showed an increase or no change. So right there, okay, when you hear these anecdotal reports when soldiers get deployed, their fitness level just declines, the data does not support that, at least for strength, power, and endurance. In addition, for body composition, you see sort of mixed results as well. And again, those who have been deployed, that's going to largely depend on where you're located at combat outpost or FOB and what your mission is. But when you summarize everything, the consistent findings are that aerobic fitness declines, whereas muscle strength and power and endurance increases or stays the same. Now, anecdotally, I was deployed for 1 year, and it was very interesting. The first 4 months of my deployment, I was fairly operational, so my fitness declined a fair bit. But after that, we went to a training environment where I had a chance to go to the gym every day. My fitness increased. So again, when you talk to people who've been deployed, you'll hear a lot of different reports. My fitness got worse, my fitness got better, fitness stayed the same. Depends on a lot of different factors. One of the things the U.S. military did, so over 10 years ago, to try to standardize the way we're training soldiers. So one of the limitations was that if you went to any given installation in the U.S. military, everybody was doing something different, and a lot of injuries were occurring. So they made 2 major changes in the U.S. Army training doctrine. Number 1, they changed the type of exercises they were doing to more mimic sort of warfighter tasks and battle drills. But also they limited the amount of long-distance running. In its place, they added more interval-type training. So the U.S. military does what is called 30-60s and 61-20s, which is just the work-rest ratio of high-intensity interval sprinting. And when they did this, this work was done by Joe Knappich and Bruce Jones, 2 well-known military physiologists for the U.S., and they showed that this type of training, when they made these changes, were effective in reducing injuries and maintaining the Army physical fitness scores. So they incorporated this in the doctrine. So when the U.S. Army soldier goes to basic training, the training is fairly standardized. And again, just showing a graph there. This graph is from the Health of the Force report. But you can see when we implemented, is there a pointer here? Yeah, this is when this physical fitness training doctrine was implemented. And you can see when you implement evidence-based training, you do see a decline in musculoskeletal injuries. So very powerful data here. But because this outcome was the Army physical fitness test, several questions linger. Okay, what specifically made this standard physical fitness training program superior? Because they changed 2 things: the amount of running they did in the physical fitness exercises. Is the Army physical fitness test the most valid measure of combat readiness? I think most of us in this audience would clearly say no. Is the standardized physical training optimal for elite and highly fit warfighters? So would the type of training that we're doing for basic training, would that be appropriate for the type of warriors that Ray and Paul are training? Probably not. And are we really training how we fight? Again, that was the theme from the very first talk we had today. So I just want to turn to 2 quick studies. And from the airport yesterday, I was in the taxi with Andrew Jones talk about this study briefly. This is the Burgomaster study published in Journal of Physiology 2008, almost 10 years ago, one of the highest rated journals. It is phenomenal results where they used 2 different programs, very different in their sort of programmatic design. One was 6 weeks of endurance training, okay? You can see that they trained 5 days a week, 40 to 60 minutes of cycling exercise for a total exercise time of 4.5 hours a week. In contrast, another group did only sprint interval training, again on a bike. And this was 4 to 6 repeats of Wingate tests. And again, I was talking to Jay and everybody. That's very special for me to be here at the Wingate Institute. My master's thesis was out of using the Wingate test. And I can remember 1993 wanting to learn more about the Wingate test. I called McMaster University. I wanted to speak to Odin Borrower. I spoke to his lab tech, and I got all the protocol that needs for the Wingate test. So the Wingate test has a very special meaning to me, one of the very tough tests. So in this training program, they did 4 to 6 repeat Wingate tests, separated by 4.5 minutes, only 3 times a week. Total training time, 1.5 hours a week. Amazing, when they took muscle biopsies and they looked at oxidative markers, similar results. Okay, so again, there is some scientific evidence to support using interval training in military population. The one thing this study does not address is, okay, how do these 2 programs, how might they differ in other outcome variables like, rucksack carry or other things soldiers might need to do. We don't know that. But another very interesting study as well is just to demonstrate that you don't have to always run long distances to build aerobic fitness. This is a study done in Jyväskylä, Finland, okay, published in Journal of Applied Physiology. And when you go on this website, you can go on this website to see which articles are most frequently read and cited. This is one of the articles that's been most frequently read from Journal of Applied Physiology. I think clear military applications, where again, what they did is they incorporated sort of explosive, high velocity training, and they demonstrated great improvements in all these sort of metrics related to running economy and aerobic basis as well. So there's a big neuromuscular basis that you can train as well that will improve, I think, soldiers' ability to do rucksack carry. Again, this is a slide I show. I had the privilege of doing a research sabbatical with the Finnish Defense Forces in 2009. And how many people are familiar with Paavo Nurmi at all? A very famous Olympic runner. They called him the Flying Finn. And the story goes is that, when they honor people in typical Olympic fashion, they have a statue in the nude. And he was there with his family, and when they unveiled the statue, he simply said, "I don't run naked," and wasn't very impressed, and I think left. But the reason I show this slide is I'm convinced if Paavo Nurmi were alive today, and he would go to an installation to see how soldiers are tested, he would see the U.S. military running 2 miles. But then, if you were to see how U.S. soldiers or Israeli soldiers perform on a battlefield, he would see pictures like this. And you might say, well, geez, why do you test soldiers in T-shirts and shorts? Because they don't go into combat with T-shirts and shorts. And again, that's very consistent with the first talk we had today as well. So, and again, there's a lot of novel tests. I'll show one test that Ray came up with that is much more functionally related to what a soldier has to do on the battlefield. So again, I give Jay Hoffman a lot of credit where when he was the president of the NSCA, he really made this sort of tactical athlete, for soldiers a top priority. And he hosted and chaired the first executive, Blue Ribbon panel. This is the second Blue Ribbon panel that we had several years ago. But we invited about 20 experts, and we looked at all the things that soldiers have to do. You can see here, these are like typical tasks that a soldier might have to do, okay? And then we had a group of subject matter experts rate these based on level of requirement with physical fitness. These are the health-related components of fitness, the skill-related components of fitness, and we rated all these components on what was required for all these movements. And this is what we came up with, okay? Strength and power were number 1 and 2. Now again, when you look at how we test people with our Army physical fitness test, 2 minutes of push-ups, 2 minutes of sit-ups, and a 2-mile run, we test endurance, body composition, and aerobics. So clearly, the way militaries, for the most part, I think this is internationally, assess strength and power, there's a gap because we don't do it very well. Well, at least from this data, strength and power are requirements to perform duties on a battlefield. And again, I'm looking at Yuval here, so this is a very interesting thing too. We had a little fun. We had a round table at the 3rd International Congress of Soldier Physical Performance. We had 5 experts arguing that strength was most important for militaries to train. We had 5 experts argue that it was aerobic. At the end of the talk, Yuval said, "You guys both have it wrong," and I agree with him because a soldier is a hybrid athlete. Depending on mission demands, maybe high aerobic demands might be needed, then there might be high strength demands. So the bottom line is you probably have to train across the continuum of fitness variables. And again, there is some data to show that when you use a comprehensive approach, you get good outcomes in terms of physically demanding occupational tasks. We mentioned the increase in load carriage over the years, and again, just showing from the U.S. military, from the Civil War to the current war, that linear increase in load carriage abilities. We also will briefly talk about women in combat. We've also done some studies to study how to best optimize training women, especially with regard to their upper body strength and power. Okay. Now, when we talk about women in the military, it's very interesting to note a few things, that whatever variable you look at, there's always going to be overlap, whereas the strongest women, or the most fit women, are going to be fitter than the least fit men. This is some data from Marilyn Sharp's laboratory at UCerium. It's showing what's called incremental dynamic lift, which is right there, sort of simulates like a power clean, but very standardized and like a weight rack. And you can see here, male values, female values. But you see the overlap here between men and women. So again, the bottom line is that there's always going to be overlap between the strongest women and the weakest men. So we did a 6-month training study at Penn State. This is funded by the U.S. military. The question was, what is the optimal or Cadillac program on how you should train people to improve the load carriage ability and their upper body strength and lifting capability. So sometimes there's anecdotal evidence that women cannot increase their upper body strength and power, but clearly from the data here out of 6 months of training, you can see significant increases in power output. And again, with the upper body increases here, notice that 25 to 35% over 6 months of training. Here's an example of an outlier. This is a female upper arm before and after 6 months of training, about a 66% increase in upper arm muscle cross-sectional area. So again, women can exhibit significant hypertrophy with optimal strength and power programs. Now, this is another very interesting graph where we had all these different training programs that trained for 6 months, and we had one group that only trained for aerobic running. And you can see here that each of our groups decreased their time in the 2-mile run, with the exception of that the group that only did aerobic running. So again, the bottom line here is to improve your load carriage ability, you have to incorporate both aerobic and resistance training as well. Okay. Now, just comparing our results where we trained women for 6 months, comparing them to a static or control group of men. These bars represent the female value as a percent of the male value before training. Before training, this is how women compare to men. After 6 months of training, now we show the female score as a percentage of the male score. Now, notice a couple things, that for sit-ups, they go above 100%. But what's also very interesting here is look at the most militarily relevant tasks that we did, which would be a 2-mile loaded run rucksack carry or a pivot box lift, okay? That the female score as a percent of male score are closer in these occupation relevant tasks than they are in pure strength or power measures. So if you're going to compare just men and women just on strength and power, you're going to get sort of, one look. But when you look at occupationally relevant tasks, the differences between genders is more narrow. And again, notice after 6 months of training here, using heavy weights and low repetitions, that the female score for load carriage was equal to the male score. Now, this is one of our training programs, the training program that trained for strength and power, which was in the neighborhood of 3 to 8 repetition maximum. Okay, so again, I think this is very important data as well. This was just a summary article, a review article that we published in Journal of Strength and Research, just showing what we think are some of the key guidelines on how to optimally design a training program in the military, specifically for women or even men as well. But a few things here, that you probably need a minimum of 6 months training to really adequately prepare somebody for the rigors of load carriage. Okay, that's what the data seems to show. Obviously, you want to incorporate progressive load carriage training. Again, from the data I showed, you want to incorporate heavy resistance, or sets in the 3 to 8 RM range. You want to probably include some HIIT training, like we said, bovine, high-intensity interval training. You can, we talked about last night at dinner. We talked about non-linear periodized training as well, which might have some utility in military environments as well. And you really want to have innovative doctrine and operationalize as best practices. Okay, so again, there's a very key review article here published by Joe Knappich looking at training programs for load carriage. And a couple key points here. How should you train for road carriage? This is summary results. You see the quality score here. Okay, and they looked at all these different combinations. Programs that only train aerobically, programs that train upper body, lower body, in total. So number one, training specificity, as you would imagine. Those studies that incorporated road carriage training had the highest effect size. Okay. Secondarily, those groups that use a periodized approach over a linear approach appear to have a higher effect size as well. Next point, if that you did upper body training with aerobic training or upper and lower body training only, you get the lowest effect size. Okay. And again, lower effect size here. So it's probably like a comprehensive approach, both resistance, aerobic, and incorporating load carriage ability that is going to give you, obviously, the best outcome for load carriage. This is a study we did with Phil Kramer at the University of Connecticut, again, showing that when you use a combined approach, okay, you get a greater percentage increase in lifting tasks than when you need to train for just strength or aerobic versus the control group as well. Okay. Now, we can make singular measurements of fitness parameters, but what's very important with the military, I think, is to use functionally, as we said, occupational relevant tasks. Here's some examples here. And again, Ray Baer, again, with the Thor group there, developed what's called an operator readiness test. I know the name has changed over the years. Is that okay to say right now, operator readiness test? And again, they did a focus group survey and look what do operators do on the battlefield. And Ray was very innovative and came up with these similar tasks in his environment there. 11 tasks. We published this in 2016, and I think Ray probably speak a little bit more about this tomorrow as well. Okay. So again, this is how we train soldiers. Anybody you talk to in the military say, hey, I need to train hundreds of soldiers with minimal equipment in a big space. That's the legacy approach. Okay. How do we start to move here to here? It's a big mindset change. It's a big culture change. We hosted the Army Science Board last summer, and we briefed them on all the great things we're doing. And the chair of that committee was a retired Major General Listar Martinez Lopez. And after our talk, he said, Brad, he goes, remember one thing, when you talk about performance, don't neglect the importance of the social sciences. At the end of the day, it's all about change in behavior. Whether it's a military leader getting them to adopt, a more innovative approach, whether it's a trainer, whether it's a soldier themselves, changing and shaping behavior so that way they're using evidence-based best practices to improve their performance. And again, athletic and collegiate models have known that for some time here. Now, another interesting thing too is this is a picture of the Singaporean fitness school. Now, when I talked about the Army changing their doctrine there about 10 years ago, they did consider using implements or taking dumbbells to the field to get a great overload, but they decided that wasn't logistically feasible, so they didn't do that. But at this time, when they were considering that, the Singaporean fitness school came over to observe, and they took that back, and you can see here they incorporated using dumbbells in the field training environment. So sometimes militaries that are smaller in size maybe are easier to get things done or implemented as well. But again, as any strength conditioning coach will tell you, what you can do in the field is just the limit of your imagination. So it is possible to train with heavy loads in the field as well. Again, one of the things I think in terms of training in the future, how do we best leverage innovative wearable sensing technologies? Again, I think that's clearly going to be the way of the future. But when you hear these companies pitch, they make all these claims, and the claims that are being made with wearable technologies aren't to date supported by the literature. Maybe we'll get more emerging literature as well. So a lot of claims are being made. I haven't quite seen the data yet. But something we're sort of excited about is this system here, Dari, that we had visit in our library. Fairly new technology. It's markerless motion capture system. So those of you that have done biomechanical work know it oftentimes takes a lot of time to prep somebody with markers. This is a way that's very field expedient, and we're going to have to come up in July. We're going to brief our athletic director too, but try to use this for both the military and athletic lines of research. So again, just some military applications for wearable technologies. Again, there's a lot of international, national working groups as well right now, really trying to understand how the military can best utilize this technology. So going forward, based on my experience, and I've been working in military performance since 1991, I know there's a lot of legacy people here as well. But here are some key points, I think, in how we optimize or operationalize military performance in military environments. And Paul said this, you got to start with key leader prioritization. Whether it's a commanding general or leader, they have to say, this is important to me, number one, you're not going to put some resources behind this, number two. Short of that, you're going to be very challenged. The second bullet comment, what I like to say is tension, deconfliction among medical, training, and operational stakeholders. And the U.S. Army, it's really interesting where the medical side of the house, depending on who you talk to, they think they own, the training aspect, but you talk to the training doctor command, they think they own it. So there's a natural tension there, and it's only by working together, because both groups probably are important stakeholders in this end. End user buy-in, and again, getting back to the RACE test, on this operating readiness test, they surveyed soldiers. What do you do? So it's really important to get the end user buy-in. As scientists, we can come up with these things we think will work or should work, but at the end of the day, it's going to be that buy-in that's going to really help something become operationalized. We talked about the social sciences, metrics a little bit. We have to come to consensus on metrics. I bet if we took a survey right now, what are the 2 or 3 metrics that we should assess for soldier performance, we would probably have a lot of common overlap. We'd have some differences as well, but we really have to, move past that discussion, come to some consensus there. As long as things are valid, reliable, and expedient, there's a lot of different ways to measure performance and fitness. Mobility under load and leveraging predictive analytics. We have a mathematician on our staff. His name is Chi Mi, and we're trying to leverage his skill set, which is machine learning and predictive, analytics, just trying to detect patterns in large data there. Okay. So this is a graph that we briefed our athletic director just the way ahead. Task specificity is important. State of science testing, physical, cognitive, social applications, wearable technologies. Using this data, for the coach. And again, I just wanted to get a little shout out there for the 4th International Congress on Soldiers' Physical Performance. 20 November to 1 December is going to be a very, very good program there. And I feel a lot of thanks for your attention. Be happy to answer any questions.
Chris, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you please go back to the slide and show the differences, the gender differences?
Yep.
How much women improve during the training?
Yeah. Which about? I don't speak Hebrew, so how do I? It's a shame.
Sure. I think this one.
Yeah.
Okay. So my basic question is, this is the improvement of women during the training, after training.
Yeah.
But is that in comparison to males at baseline?
Yes.
So do you have a parallel improvement for male? Because I want to know at the end of the basic training what's the difference.
Right. Yes. That's a very good question. Yeah. This was a control group of men that did not train. The other thing I glossed over what these were. These are the way they train. This is strength power. So again, the groups that showed the most improvement were the SP groups, the groups that trained for strength and power, or were higher loads that activated type 2 motor. Yet your point is, if we overlaid the male data on here too?
Yes, so that actually gives us the notion. After training, what is the goal of how much you feel can reach in comparison to male at baseline?
Right.
What are they determining that comparison?
Yeah. Good question. Again, we did not measure the men here. And so there's always going to be a gender gap. However, again, in my view, the larger question is, what is that requirement? Okay? And whether you're male or female, if you can meet that requirement. And that's what the U.S. approach has been, establishing the physical employment standard requirement as well. Yeah. Good question. So just another aside, we're talking with Julie Grease from the British Ministry of Defense, and we're hoping to do a study with them. We would train both men and women at the same time to absolutely answer that question. Yes.
Do you separate the women from the men and why they train, or they train together?
In the U.S. military? Yeah, we have gender integrated training at Fort Jackson. We also have at Fort Benning where only males go through the training, so it depends on the installation.
Do you see more injuries where only women train and when women train with the men?
Yeah, I can't cite any study right now, but I think I do understand that when you train together, maybe you have more injuries with the women. I'm looking to Dawn, would that be accurate pretty much?
Yes.
Yeah. And we did publish one study with Danny Moran with the Israeli Defense Forces that was both men and women together. It was really interesting, that study we posted 2 years ago. The female performance increased. The male performance did not increase. So I interpreted that where the training
The training requirement
was
for-
scaled down for men only. Yeah.
So adjusted for female.
Okay. Yep. Yes. Yep.
Understanding like the modern battlefield, how when you guys ranked what's more relevant for soldiers, why was speed, especially strength and power, at the top? Why is speed ranked so low? Especially when the modern battlefield these days is more comprised of repeated sprintability and being able to maintain that a certain amount of speed.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you look at these tasks here, move over short distances, clearly speed there. But, again, when you look at most of these, I think, that's strength, right? Strength. So maybe these tasks were a little biased more towards strength. If we had a few other tasks that were speed related, maybe that would have rated higher, because these are composite scores here, right? So even though speed is very important here, speed wasn't important in all these other tasks where I think the strength more was. So maybe a little bias in terms of some of these measures here. But yeah, for social mobility, speed's going to be quicker too. Yeah.
Last question.
So the question, I think the message is that you have to train for positioning. So if you have different missions, so you train for different missions. So it's not that you train absolutely for the same level of mission. The lower level of requirement, then if you have missions that is higher requirement, then you get.
I agree.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks.